A man wearing clothes older than some of the diners themselves walked into the city's most exclusive steakhouse and calmly ordered a $350 Wagyu ribeye. His jacket was torn at the seams. His beard was matted. His hands were covered in dirt. And when the waiter asked if he was sure about his order, he simply nodded and smiled. Within seconds, whispers rippled through the dining room. A woman clutched her pearls. A businessman stared over his wine glass. The manager's jaw tightened as he watched from the bar. They had no idea they were looking at the man who owned the building they sat in. The man whose signature was on every paycheck. The man who, 35 years ago, had been thrown out of a place just like this for the crime of being poor. But tonight wasn't about nostalgia. It was about truth. Because someone had sent him a video. A video of a homeless veteran being dragged out of this very restaurant while guests recorded it on their phones and laughed. And beneath that video was a single typed line. Your name is on the door. Is your soul still in the building? What happened next would cost some people their careers, others their dignity. But one person, a quiet waitress in a blue vest, would change everything with 7 words written on the back of a receipt. If you want to see how one act of courage exposed an empire of cruelty, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in his position. And smash the like button because this story is about to get intense. The reservation book at La Meridian showed no walk-ins after 6:30 p.m. on Saturdays. It was policy, the kind of unspoken rule that kept the wrong kind of people from wandering in off the street. But at 7:08 p.m., the front door opened, and in walked a man who looked like he had just crawled out from under a highway overpass. His jacket, a faded canvas thing with holes at both elbows, hung loose over a shirt that might have once been white. His jeans were stained with substances no dry cleaner could name. His boots, cracked and peeling, left faint smudges on the polished marble floor. The hostess froze. Around the dining room, forks paused midair. Conversations dipped into silence, then resumed in hushed, pointed tones. Is he lost? Someone call security. I'm not paying $200 a plate to sit next to that. The man didn't flinch. He walked slowly to the hostess stand, his movements calm, deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was low but clear. Table for one, please. The hostess blinked. Her smile, trained and professional, flickered like a candle in the wind. Sir, we require reservations on weekends. I don't have one. Then I'm afraid. Is there a table available? She glanced toward the dining room. 3 tables sat empty near the back, deliberately held open in case a VIP arrived. Her eyes flicked toward the manager, who stood near the bar, arms crossed, watching. He gave a single, sharp nod. Seat him. Let him embarrass himself. The hostess exhaled. Right this way. She led him to the farthest corner of the restaurant, a small 2-top wedge between the kitchen door and the service station. The kind of table reserved for last-minute walk-ins and people the staff wanted to forget. He sat without complaint. A waiter approached, young, maybe 23, with gelled hair and a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He placed a menu on the table like he was handling evidence. Can I start you with water? He asked, voice flat. Please, and I'll order now if that's all right. The waiter's pen hovered. Sure. The man's scarred finger traced down the menu, stopping near the bottom. The 16-ounce Wagyu ribeye, medium rare, with the truffle mashed potatoes and the grilled asparagus. The waiter's smile vanished. That's $350 for the steak alone. I know, and you're sure? The man looked up. His eyes, beneath the dirt and the exhaustion, were steady, unshaken. I'm sure. The waiter's face flushed. He scribbled something on his pad and turned sharply toward the kitchen, but not before muttering just loud enough to be heard. This should be good. At the next table, a man in a tailored suit leaned toward his companion, a woman draped in silk and diamonds. You see that, he whispered, loud enough to carry. They'll let anyone in these days. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Probably hasn't showered in a week. Across the room, the manager watched. His name was Richard Calloway, 48 years old, Stanford MBA, 6 years at La Meridian. He prided himself on running a tight ship. Clean, elegant, exclusive. And this man, this vagrant, was a stain on his floor. Richard pulled out his phone, and typed a quick message to the head of security. Table 18. Be ready. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the waiter slapped the order ticket onto the counter. Table 18. Full Wagyu service. The line cook looked up. The homeless guy? Yeah. He gonna pay? The waiter smirked. Doubt it. But Calloway wants us to let him order. Probably gonna make a scene when the bill comes. Good TV for the rest of the room. They laughed. But one person didn't. Her name was Maya Thornton, 34 years old, single mother of 2. She had worked at Meridian for 8 months, and every single shift she swallowed a piece of her dignity just to keep the job. She had seen men like Richard humiliate people. She had watched customers treat staff like furniture. She had stayed silent because silence paid the rent. But tonight, as she watched that man sit alone in the corner, calm and quiet while the room mocked him, something inside her cracked. She didn't know who he was, but she knew what he was about to walk into. And for the first time in a long time, Maya decided she wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. While the dining room hummed with judgment and expensive wine, one person saw what no one else could. Not because she was smarter, but because she had no choice. Before we continue, if you're hooked on this story, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to stay silent when you wanted to speak up. And like this video, so more people can see what happens when courage meets cruelty. Now let's talk about Naomi. Naomi Brooks had perfected the art of becoming invisible. At 29 years old, she had worked in upscale restaurants long enough to know that survival wasn't about skill or charm. It was about reading a room faster than a room could read you. Her uniform was pressed to perfection. Not a wrinkle, not a stain. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun that never loosened, even during double shifts. Her posture was textbook, shoulders back, chin level, hands clasped behind her when she wasn't carrying a tray. But her eyes told a different story. They were tired, deep, bone-tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. They moved constantly, scanning tables, tracking managers, cataloging every micro-expression from the kitchen staff to the customers to the hosts. Naomi didn't just work at La Meridian. She survived it. Tonight was no different. She had clocked in at 5 p.m., tied her apron, checked her section, and slipped into the rhythm she knew by heart. Smile, nod, refill, clear, repeat. But at 7:12 p.m., the rhythm broke. She was refilling water glasses at table 9 when she noticed a shift in the air. Conversations that had been flowing freely started to dip into whispers. Heads turned subtly toward the back corner of the dining room. Naomi followed their gaze. And that's when she saw him, a man in torn, filthy clothing sitting alone at table 18. His hands rested on the white tablecloth, scarred and dirt-streaked. His face was hidden beneath a thick, unkempt beard. His jacket looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. He didn't belong, and everyone knew it. Naomi's stomach tightened. She had seen this before. Different faces, different nights, but the same script. Someone would wander in, out of place, desperate, or confused, or just looking for warmth. And the staff would circle like wolves. Not to help, to remove. She glanced toward the bar. Richard Calloway stood there, arms crossed, eyes locked on table 18. His expression was calm, controlled. But Naomi had worked under him long enough to recognize the look. It wasn't concern. It was calculation. Near the kitchen doors, 2 senior servers huddled together, their voices low but their body language loud. One of them, Marcus, a 6-year veteran with a sharp tongue and sharper elbows, gestured toward the man's table and smirked. The other server, a woman named Vanessa, laughed quietly and shook her head. Naomi didn't need to hear the words. She already knew what they were saying. He won't be able to pay. Security's going to drag him out. This is going to be good. Her jaw clenched. She turned back to table 9, poured the last glass of water, smiled at the couple who didn't look at her, and moved toward the service station to drop off her empty pitcher. That's when she heard her name. Naomi. She turned. Richard stood 5 feet away, hands in his pockets, his voice low and smooth. I need you to take table 18. Her heart sank. Marcus is already covering that section, she said carefully. I'm reassigning it. Why? Richard's smile was thin, practiced. Because I trust you to handle it professionally. Translation. I need someone who won't cause a scene when this goes south. Naomi held his gaze for a moment. She wanted to say no. She wanted to ask why he was setting this man up. She wanted to demand answers. But she didn't, because asking questions at La Meridian didn't get you answers. It got you fired. Understood, she said quietly. Richard nodded and walked away. Naomi stood there, tray in hand, staring at the corner table. She had spent years in this industry learning one unspoken rule: don't get involved. Customers came and went. Managers played their games. Staff whispered and schemed. And if you want to keep your job, you kept your head down and your mouth shut. But as she watched the man sit there, calm and quiet while the entire room mocked him, something shifted inside her. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he was here. But she knew what was coming. And for the first time in a long time, staying silent felt like betrayal. Naomi took a slow breath, straightened her posture, and walked toward table 18. As she approached, she noticed details the others had missed. His hands, though dirty, weren't shaking. His posture, though slumped, wasn't defeated. His eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, weren't desperate. They were watchful. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady. "My name is Naomi. I'll be taking care of you tonight." He nodded. "Thank you." His voice was quiet but clear, educated, not slurred or broken. She placed a glass of water in front of him. "Your order should be out shortly." "I appreciate it." She hesitated. Then, against every instinct screaming at her to walk away, she leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "Sir, I don't know your situation, but I need you to know something." His eyes sharpened. "The manager has been watching you since you walked in. So has security. If there's any issue with payment, they won't ask questions. They'll just remove you." The man studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled, faintly, sadly. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." Naomi blinked. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Naomi!" She turned. Richard stood near the bar, watching her. "A word. Now." Her chest tightened. She glanced back at the man, but his expression gave nothing away. Naomi straightened and walked toward the bar, her pulse hammering in her ears. This wasn't about food. It wasn't about service. It was about power. And she had just stepped in the middle of a game she didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. Tonight, someone was going to lose. And Naomi had just decided it wasn't going to be the man in the corner. What Naomi didn't know was that her small act of warning had just set off a chain reaction that would expose everyone in that building. And the man she thought she was protecting? He was about to protect her right back. The man sitting at table 18 wasn't who anyone thought he was. Not the servers whispering in the kitchen. Not the manager watching from the bar. Not even Naomi, who had just risked her job to warn him. His name was Ethan Cross, and he owned everything they were standing on. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Comment below and tell me, would you have the guts to do what Ethan is doing? And smash that like button because this is about to get real. Now let me tell you who Ethan Cross really is. Ethan Cross was worth $4.7 billion. He owned 47 upscale restaurants across 12 states. His name appeared on Forbes lists, charity galas, and corporate boardroom doors. He had shaken hands with presidents, dined with celebrities, and built an empire from nothing. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was invisible. The jacket he wore was 35 years old. He had kept it in a locked drawer in his penthouse closet, wrapped in plastic, untouched since the day he swore he'd never need it again. It smelled like failure, like cold nights on a bridge overpasses, like the kind of hunger that makes your hands shake when you finally get food. The jeans were from the same era, stained with oil from the kitchen where he used to scrub floors for $4.25 an hour. The boots, cracked and peeling, had walked him through 11 job interviews before someone finally said yes. He hadn't worn these clothes in decades, but he had never thrown them away. Because Ethan Cross understood something most billionaires forgot. Wealth doesn't erase who you were. It only reveals who you've become. And right now, sitting in the corner of his own restaurant, being mocked by people on his payroll, Ethan was trying to figure out which version of himself was staring back. 3 weeks ago, an envelope had arrived at his corporate office. No return address, no name, just a flash drive and a handwritten note on plain white paper. The note said, "You built your empire on dignity. But dignity isn't on the menu at La Meridian anymore. Watch this, then decide if your name still means what you think it does." Ethan had plugged in the drive. The video was 41 seconds long. It showed an older man, maybe 60, wearing a torn military jacket and walking in a La Meridian with his head down. He asked the hostess for a table. She smiled politely and said they were fully booked. The man said he didn't need much, just a corner, just something warm to eat. The hostess called the manager. The manager called security. Within 90 seconds, the man was being physically escorted out the front door, while a table full of businessmen filmed it on their phones. One of them uploaded it to social media with a caption, "Fine dining stays fine when the trash gets taken out." The post got 11,000 likes. Ethan watched the video 4 times. Then he opened his files. La Meridian had the worst performance metrics in his entire chain. High turnover, low reviews, 6 settlements in 2 years, all signed with NDAs. He had trusted his regional managers to handle it. They assured him it was growing pains. A tough neighborhood, bad press from competitors. But now, staring at that 41-second video, Ethan realized the truth. He had stopped paying attention, and people had suffered because of it. So he made a decision. No inspectors, no consultants, no announced visits. He would go himself, alone, disguised as the kind of person his staff had been trained to remove. His assistant, Caroline, had begged him to reconsider. She said it was dangerous, unnecessary, that he could send someone trained for undercover work. But Ethan shook his head. "If I send someone else, I get a report," he said quietly. "I need to feel it." Caroline didn't argue after that. She just asked one question. "What if they recognize you?" Ethan looked at her and smiled faintly. "I've spent 35 years making sure people like them never have to look at people like me. Trust me, they won't." Now, sitting at table 18, Ethan's instincts had been proven right. Not one person had recognized him. Not the hostess who had reluctantly seated him. Not the waiter who had sneered at his order. Not the manager who stood at the bar, arms crossed, watching him like a hawk circling prey. Ethan had become exactly what he used to be, invisible. And in that invisibility, he saw everything. He saw the way the staff whispered and pointed. He saw the way nearby diners leaned away from his table, as if poverty were contagious. He saw the manager's cold, calculated stare. But he also saw something else. He saw Naomi, the way she moved through the room with quiet efficiency. The way her eyes tracked every gesture, every glance, every shift in power. The way she had leaned in, risked her job, and warned him. She didn't know who he was, but she had chosen to protect him anyway. That meant something. Ethan's hand rested on the edge of the table, his fingers tracing the white linen. Beneath the dirt and the calluses, his wedding ring was gone. His watch, worth more than most people's cars, sat locked in a safe 20 miles away. All he had was a small phone hidden in the sole of his boot. One button would bring his legal team crashing through the front door. But he wasn't ready to press it yet, because this wasn't just about exposing bad behavior. It was about understanding how deep the rot had spread, and whether anyone in this building still remembered what his company was supposed to stand for. Across the room, Richard Calloway pulled out his phone and typed a message. Ethan didn't need to see it to know what it said. The trap was being set, and soon, everyone in this restaurant would have to choose a side. Ethan leaned back in his chair and waited, not for his steak, but for the moment when masks would fall, and truth would walk through the door, whether anyone was ready for it or not. Ethan had come here expecting cruelty. What he didn't expect was that one waitress would force him to decide, should he destroy this place or give it one chance to be saved? That decision was about to be made for him. Naomi thought the warning she gave would be enough. She thought she could go back to work, keep her head down, and let the night play out however it was going to play out. She was wrong, because what she heard in the kitchen wasn't just cruel. It was criminal. If you're as shaken by this as I am, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what you would do in Naomi's position. And like this video, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let's go back to the kitchen. The kitchen at La Meridian was a machine. Stainless steel gleamed under fluorescent lights. Flames roared from gas burners. Orders were shouted, plated, and sent out in a choreographed rhythm that never stopped. But when Naomi pushed through the swinging doors at 7:31 p.m., the rhythm broke. Voices dropped mid-sentence. Heads turned. And then, just as quickly, everyone went back to work. Everyone except the people gathered near the walk-in cooler. Richard Calloway stood at the center of a tight circle. Around him, Marcus, the senior server, Vanessa, the floor lead, and Tony, the headline cook, a broad-shouldered man with 15 years of kitchen experience and a reputation for doing whatever management asked, no questions. Naomi slowed her steps. She wasn't supposed to be back here. Her section was on the floor, but she had come to grab extra napkins from the storage shelf near the dishwashing station. She told herself to keep walking. Just grab the napkins and go. But something about the way they were standing made her pause. Richard's voice was low, controlled, the kind of tone that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. Table 18 ordered the Wagyu, he said calmly. Full price. Full service. Tony nodded. Yeah, it's plated. About to go out. Good. Richard's smile was thin. But I need you to make a small adjustment. Tony frowned. What kind of adjustment? Richard glanced around the kitchen. Most of the staff were focused on their stations, knives chopping, pans sizzling. No one was paying attention. He leaned in slightly. Use the trim from yesterday's delivery, Richard said quietly. The batch we flagged for disposal. Tony blinked. The spoiled batch. Correct. There was a pause. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Marcus shifted his weight, arms crossed, watching. Tony stared at Richard. You want me to serve him rotten meat? I want you to serve him what he ordered, Richard said smoothly. If the quality happens to be subpar, well, that's a risk when you can't afford to dine somewhere like this. If he complains, we'll apologize. If he gets sick, Richard shrugged. That's not our problem. Naomi's blood went cold. She stood frozen behind a prep counter, hidden by a rack of hanging pots, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Tony hesitated. Richard, if health inspectors. There won't be inspectors, Richard cut him off. He's homeless. He won't call anyone. And if he does, who's going to believe him? A man in rags claiming we poison him? Against our word? He let the question hang in the air. This is a liability issue, Tony. We let him order. We serve him. What happens after that is his responsibility. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice casual. Makes sense to me. Guys clearly try and scam a free meal. This way, he eats, he leaves, and we don't get dragged into some PR nightmare when he can't pay. Vanessa nodded slowly. And if he doesn't finish the plate, we just comp it and move on. Clean hands. Tony looked down at the floor. Naomi could see the conflict on his face. He wasn't a bad man. She had worked alongside him for months. He had a daughter in high school. He complained about his mortgage. He showed up early and stayed late. But he also had bills. And Richard Calloway signed his paychecks. After a long silence, Tony exhaled. Yeah, okay. Richard clapped him on the shoulder. Good man. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, Marcus and Vanessa trailing behind him. Tony stood alone for a moment, staring at the cooler door. Then he opened it, pulled out a plastic-wrapped cut of meat marked with a red disposal tag, and carried it back to his station. Naomi's hands trembled. She had heard every word. Every single word. And now she had a choice. Her mind raced. If she reported this, Richard would know it was her. She was the only server who had gone into the kitchen in the last 5 minutes. There were cameras, witnesses. He would fire her on the spot. And it wouldn't just be the job. It would be the reference, the reputation, the whisper network that followed servers from restaurant to restaurant. Once you were labeled a troublemaker, no one hired you. She thought about her rent, due in 6 days. She thought about her younger brother, who she was helping put through community college. She thought about the warning already sitting in her personnel file from last month, when she had politely corrected a manager who had miscounted her tips. If she spoke up, she lost everything. But if she stayed silent, she looked toward the plating station. Tony was searing the spoiled meat. The smell was faint, masked by garlic and butter, but she knew. She had been in enough kitchens to recognize the sour edge beneath the seasoning. If that man ate it, he could get seriously ill. Food poisoning from spoiled beef could mean hospitalization, organ damage, In someone already weakened by life on the streets, it could mean death. And Richard knew that. He was counting on it. Naomi's chest tightened. She had spent years learning to survive by staying small, by not making waves, by swallowing her anger and cashing her checks and telling herself it wasn't her fight. But this wasn't about pride. This was about a human life. She took a slow breath. Then, moving carefully, she grabbed the napkin she had come for and walked back toward the floor. Her face was calm, professional, unreadable. But inside, her decision had already been made. She didn't know who the man at table 18 was. She didn't know if he could pay, or why he had come, or what he was hoping to prove. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let them kill him. Not tonight. Not on her watch. Naomi pushed through the kitchen doors and stepped back into the dining room. The steak would be plated in 2 minutes. She had 120 seconds to figure out how to stop it, and she had absolutely no idea how. But silence, she realized, wasn't survival. It was surrender, and Naomi Brooks was done surrendering. What Naomi didn't know was that the man she was about to save had the power to destroy everyone in that building. But first, she had to make sure he lived long enough to use it. The clock was ticking, and the steak was almost ready. Naomi had 90 seconds. 90 seconds to cross the dining room, deliver a plate of poisoned meat, and somehow stop a man from eating it without getting caught. She had no plan, no backup, just a folded piece of receipt paper and a decision that could cost her everything. If this story has you holding your breath, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single moment. Comment below and tell me, have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting yourself? And smash that like button because what happens next is unforgettable. Let's go. The kitchen bell rang. Table 18 up. Naomi turned toward the pass. The plate sat under the heat lamp, pristine. A perfect 16-ounce Wagyu ribeye, seared to a dark crust, resting on a bed of truffle mashed potatoes. Asparagus spears glistened with butter. A sprig of rosemary completed the presentation. It looked like art. It smelled like a 5-star meal. But Naomi knew what it really was. A weapon. Tony stood behind the line, arms crossed, avoiding her eyes. Marcus leaned against the counter nearby, watching her with a smirk that made her stomach turn. "Better hustle," Marcus said. "Man's probably starving." Naomi didn't respond. She lifted the plate with both hands, her fingers steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. Then she walked. The dining room felt longer than it had ever felt before. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. She passed table 12, where a woman in pearls laughed too loud at her date's joke. She passed table 9, where a businessman scrolled through his phone while his untouched lobster went cold. She passed the bar, where Richard Calloway stood watching her like a hawk tracking a field mouse. His eyes followed her. She could feel them. At table 18, Ethan Cross sat with his hands folded on the white tablecloth, his gaze distant, lost in thought. Naomi approached. "Your steak, sir," she said, her voice even professional. Ethan looked up and nodded. "Thank you." She set the plate down in front of him, and in that moment, as her hand hovered above the table, she made her move. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled a small piece of paper, torn from a receipt, folded twice. She had scribbled the message 60 seconds ago with a pen that barely worked, her handwriting shaky but legible. As she adjusted the placement of the plate, her fingers brushed against Ethan's palm. The paper transferred. Smooth. Invisible. A sleight of hand born from desperation. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. In that half second, no words were spoken, but everything was communicated. "Trust me. Please." Ethan's expression didn't change, but his fingers closed around the note. Naomi stepped back, nodded politely, and turned. She walked away as calmly as she had arrived, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of paper unfolding. Ethan's hands moved beneath the table. He unfolded the note slowly, keeping his face neutral, his posture relaxed. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, but clear. 3 lines, 9 words that stopped the world. "Do not eat. They're watching you. This was meant to harm you." Ethan's breath caught. He read it again, then a third time. His scarred hand tightened around the paper, the edges crinkling under the pressure. For a moment, he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the plate in front of him. The steak looked perfect, expensive, exactly what he had ordered. But the note in his hand told a different story. This was meant to harm you, not embarrass, not humiliate. Harm. 1,000 memories crashed through his mind in an instant. He was 19 again, digging through restaurant dumpsters for food that hadn't spoiled yet. He was 22, being cursed at by a line cook who had accidentally spilled boiling water on his hand because he had dared to ask for a shift meal. He was 24, sleeping under a bridge, shivering through the night, invisible to the people walking past him in tailored suits. Back then, he had been powerless. Back then, no one had slipped him a note. No one had warned him. No one had cared. But tonight, someone did. A waitress whose name he didn't know had just risked everything to protect him. She didn't know he owned the building. She didn't know he could end careers with a phone call. She just saw a man in danger. And she chose to act. Ethan's jaw tightened. He set his fork down carefully on the edge of the plate and leaned back in his chair. He didn't touch the food. He didn't lift his knife. He just sat there, looking at it. Across the room, Richard Calloway noticed. He had been watching from the bar, pretending to review a seating chart on his tablet. But his eyes had never left table 18. He saw the waitress deliver the plate. He saw the man look down at it. And now, he saw the man not eating. Richard's eyes narrowed. He set his tablet down and walked slowly toward the floor. Marcus, who had been loitering near the kitchen doors, caught his signal and followed. Naomi stood near the service station, her back to them, her hands trembling as she stacked empty dessert plates. She could feel them approaching. She could feel everything unraveling. But she didn't turn around. She just kept moving. Keep working. Keep breathing. Don't give them a reason. Richard stopped 3 feet behind her. Naomi. Her blood turned to ice. She turned slowly. Richard's expression was calm. Too calm. Yes, sir. Did you say something to the guest at table 18? Her throat tightened. I delivered his meal. That's all. That's all. Richard studied her face for a long, agonizing moment. Then he smiled. Good. Because if someone were to interfere with a guest's experience here, that would be grounds for immediate termination. You understand that, don't you? Naomi nodded. I understand. Excellent. He patted her shoulder lightly, a gesture that felt like a threat. Carry on. He walked away. Naomi exhaled slowly, her hands still shaking. She glanced toward table 18. Ethan was still sitting there, staring at the untouched plate. And for the first time all night, she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not confusion. Rage. Cold. Controlled. Absolute. The kind of rage that didn't explode. The kind that calculated. Ethan folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he raised his hand. Naomi's stomach dropped. He was calling her over. She walked toward him slowly, her mind screaming at her to run, to quit, to walk out the door and never come back. But she didn't. She walked to his table and met his eyes. Yes, sir. Ethan's voice was low, quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. Thank you for your honesty, he said. I'd like to speak with the manager, please. Naomi's heart stopped. Are you sure? She whispered. Ethan's smile was faint. Sad. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Naomi had just set off a bomb, and Richard Calloway was about to walk straight into the blast. What happened next would change everyone's life in that restaurant. Forever. Richard Calloway had built a career on control. He controlled the floor, the staff, the narrative. And when someone threatened that control, he didn't wait. He eliminated them. Publicly. If you're as furious as I am right now, hit that subscribe button and join me in seeing this through to the end. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever witnessed someone get punished for doing the right thing. And like this video because justice is coming, and it's going to be brutal. Let's watch it unfold. Ethan's request hung in the air like smoke. I'd like to speak with the manager, please. Naomi's face went pale. She knew what was coming. She had known the moment she slipped that note into his hand. But hearing him say the words out loud made it real. I'll get him for you, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Thank you. Naomi turned and walked toward the bar, her legs trembling beneath her. Richard was already watching. He had seen the exchange. seen the way the man at table 18 had raised his hand, seen the look on Naomi's face. And he knew she had done something. Marcus leaned in from the side, his voice low. "He's asking for you." Richard's jaw tightened. "I know." He smoothed his tie, rolled his shoulders back, and stepped onto the dining room floor. But he didn't walk toward table 18. Not yet. First, he made a detour, straight to Naomi. She was standing near the service station, head down, hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Naomi." His voice was ice. She turned slowly. Richard didn't lower his voice, didn't pull her aside. He spoke loudly, clearly, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "What did you say to that guest?" Naomi blinked. Nothing. I just delivered his meal." "Don't lie to me." Richard stepped closer, his voice rising. "I saw you lean in. I saw you whisper something." "What did you say?" Her throat tightened. "I didn't." "You didn't what?" Richard's voice cut through the dining room like a whip. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. "You didn't interfere with a paying customer. You didn't violate protocol. You didn't make this restaurant look unprofessional." Naomi's hands trembled. "Sir, I was just trying to—" "To what?" Richard's eyes flashed. "To embarrass us? To create a scene? To make yourself the hero?" Tears burned at the edges of Naomi's vision, but she refused to let them fall. Around the room, diners watched with the cold fascination of spectators at a public execution. A woman in a designer dress whispered to her companion. She must have done something awful. A man sipped his wine and muttered, "Poor management, letting staff get away with that." Marcus stood near the kitchen doors, arms crossed, watching with a faint smirk. Vanessa looked away, guilt flickering across her face, but she said nothing. Richard leaned in, his voice quieter now, but no less venomous. "You have been a problem since the day you started here. Questioning decisions, overstepping boundaries. And now this. I didn't do anything wrong," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the shaking in her chest. "You harassed a guest," Richard said flatly. "You made him uncomfortable. And you've made this establishment look incompetent." "That's not true." "It doesn't matter if it's true." Richard straightened. "What matters is perception. And right now, you're a liability." He pulled a small notepad from his jacket pocket and scribbled something on it. Then he tore off the page and handed it to her. "You're terminated. Effective immediately." The words landed like a punch. Naomi stared at the paper in her hand. Her vision blurred. Her rent, her brother's tuition, the bills stacking up on her kitchen counter. Gone. All of it. Richard raised his voice again, ensuring the room could hear. "Security will escort you out. Leave your apron at the host stand. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail." Naomi's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to scream, to fight, to tell everyone what Richard had done, what he had ordered, what kind of man he really was. But she knew it wouldn't matter. No one would believe her, not against him. So she stayed silent. She untied her apron slowly, folded it with shaking hands, and set it on the counter. Then she walked, head high, shoulders back, even as the whispers followed her, even as diners stared, even as Marcus opened the front door with exaggerated courtesy and said, "Have a good night, Naomi." She stepped out into the cold evening air. The door closed behind her, and just like that, she was gone. Inside, Richard exhaled. He turned back toward the dining room, his expression smooth, controlled, a man who had just handled an unpleasant but necessary task. Then he walked to table 18. Ethan was still sitting there, hands folded on the table, steak untouched. Richard approached with a practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. I apologize for the disturbance. I understand there was an issue." Ethan looked up at him. His face was calm. Too calm. Ethan said quietly, "Your server told me not to eat this." Richard's smile tightened. "I'm very sorry to hear that. That was completely inappropriate. As you saw, she's been let go. She also told me it was meant to harm me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I'm sure that's not what she meant, sir. Sometimes staff can be overly dramatic. I assure you, every dish that leaves our kitchen meets the highest standards." "Is that right?" "Absolutely." Ethan nodded slowly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Richard's eyes followed the movement. Ethan pulled out his phone. Not the expensive smartphone he normally carried. A small, older model. The kind that looked cheap. Disposable. But the screen was lit, and a red recording icon blinked in the corner. Richard's face went white. "I've been recording since I sat down," Ethan said calmly. "Every word, every interaction, including the conversation you had in the kitchen 20 minutes ago." The blood drained from Richard's face. "I don't know what you think you heard. I heard you order your line cook to serve me spoiled meat," Ethan said, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "I heard you say that if I got sick, it wasn't your problem. I heard you plan to harm me because you assumed I couldn't fight back." Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Ethan stood, slowly, and for the first time that night, the entire dining room fell completely silent. "My name," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the room, "is Ethan Cross. I own this restaurant. I own this building. And I own 46 others just like it." Richard's legs buckled slightly. Around the room, diners stared in shock. Marcus, standing near the kitchen, turned pale. Vanessa covered her mouth. Tony, visible through the kitchen window, froze mid-plate. Ethan looked at Richard with an expression that was somehow both sad and merciless. "You just fired the only person in this building who had the courage to do the right thing." He tapped his phone screen. "And I have everything I need to make sure you never work in this industry again." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he walked past Richard without another word. He walked past the tables full of silent, stunned diners. He walked past Marcus, who couldn't meet his eyes. He walked past the hostess stand, where the young woman who had seated him stood frozen in horror. And he walked out the front door, into the same cold night where Naomi stood, leaning against the brick wall, crying quietly into her hands. Ethan stopped. "Naomi," he said softly. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "You saved my life tonight," he said, "and I'm going to make sure you never regret it." He handed her the card. She stared at it. "Ethan Cross, CEO, Cross Hospitality Group." Her hand shook. "I don't understand." "You will," Ethan said. "Come to my office Monday morning, 9 a.m. We need to talk about your future." Then he smiled. A real smile. The first one all night. "And Naomi?" "Yes." "Thank you." Richard Calloway thought he had one. He had no idea he had just destroyed himself. And the woman he fired? She was about to become the most powerful voice in the industry. Richard Calloway had spent his entire career believing in one simple truth: power protects itself. He controlled the narrative. He controlled the staff. He controlled who stayed and who was destroyed. But tonight, he was about to learn something new. Power only protects you until it doesn't. If this moment is giving you chills, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story like this. Comment below and tell me, have you ever seen someone face the consequences they truly deserved? And smash that like button, because what happens next is pure justice. Let's finish this. Ethan Cross stood outside La Meridian for exactly 90 seconds. Long enough to hand Naomi his card. Long enough to see the shock and confusion on her tear-streaked face. Long enough to make a decision. Then he turned around and walked back inside. The dining room was still buzzing with whispers when the front door opened. Heads turned. Ethan stepped through, his worn boots leaving faint prints on the polished floor. But this time, something was different. His posture had changed. The slump in his shoulders was gone. His head was high. His eyes, sharp, cold, and absolutely in control, swept across the room like a searchlight. Richard stood near table 18, his back to the door, still trying to process what had just happened. Marcus hovered nearby, pale and silent. Vanessa had disappeared into the kitchen. Ethan walked slowly through the center of the dining room. Every step echoed. Conversations died. Silverware stopped clinking. By the time he reached the middle of the floor, the entire restaurant had gone silent. Richard turned and froze. Ethan stood there, hands in the pockets of his ragged coat, looking at him with an expression that could only be described as calm devastation. Then Ethan reached into his jacket. Richard's breath hitched. But Ethan didn't pull out the cheap recording phone. He pulled out a second phone. Sleek. Expensive. The kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He tapped the screen once. Twice. Then he held it up. On the screen, crystal clear, was a paused video. The timestamp read 6:47 p.m. The location tag read La Meridian, Kitchen Cam 3. Richard's face went sheet white. "My name," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "is Ethan Cross." He let the words settle. A woman at table 11 gasped softly. A man in a tailored suit whispered, "Holy shit. I am the founder and CEO of Cross Hospitality Group." Ethan continued, "I own this restaurant. I own this building. And I own 46 other locations across 12 states." Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan tapped the screen. The video began to play. Richard's voice filled the room, crisp and clear through the phone speaker. "Use the trim from yesterday's delivery. The batch we flagged for disposal." Tony's voice, "The spoiled batch." Richard's voice, "Correct." The dining room erupted in gasps and horrified murmurs. Ethan didn't stop the video. Tony's voice, "You want me to serve him rotten meat?" Richard's voice, "I want you to serve him what he ordered. If the quality happens to be subpar, well, that's a risk when you can't afford to dine somewhere like this. If he complains, we'll apologize. If he gets sick, that's not our problem." Ethan tapped the screen. The video stopped. He lowered the phone and looked directly at Richard. "You tried to poison me," Ethan said quietly. "Not because I was a threat, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I looked poor, because you thought I didn't matter, because you believed no one would care." Richard's lips trembled. I didn't mean it wasn't." "You meant every word," Ethan said, his voice like steel. "And you would have done it, if one person in this building hadn't had the courage to stop you." He turned toward the front door. Naomi stood just inside, frozen, her eyes wide. Ethan gestured toward her. "That woman," he said, raising his voice so the entire room could hear, "risked her job, her livelihood, and her safety to protect a stranger. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know if I could help her. She just knew it was wrong. And she acted." He turned back to Richard. "You fired her for it." Richard's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of a chair to steady himself. Ethan pulled out his recording phone and held it up. "I also have audio of everything that happened on this floor tonight. Your voice, your threats, your humiliation of an employee in front of paying customers, your abuse of power." He slipped both phones into his pocket. "Security is already on their way. Not for her. For you." As if on cue, the front door opened. Two men in dark suits stepped inside. Not restaurant security. Corporate investigators. The kind Ethan kept on retainer for situations exactly like this. They walked straight toward Richard. "Richard Calloway?" one of them said. Richard nodded weakly. "You're being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation into criminal conduct, health code violations, and workplace abuse. You need to come with us." Richard's face crumbled. He looked around the room, desperate, searching for allies. But Marcus had vanished into the kitchen. Vanessa stared at the floor. The diners who had watched Naomi get fired now looked at Richard with disgust. One of the investigators placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder. "Let's go." Richard walked toward the door, his head down, his shoulders shaking. As he passed Ethan, he stopped. "I was just doing my job," he whispered. Ethan's expression didn't change. "No," he said quietly. "You were protecting yourself. There's a difference." Richard was escorted out. The door closed behind him. The dining room remained silent. Ethan turned to face the room. "To everyone here tonight," he said, his voice steady, "I apologize. You came here for an experience that represents dignity, quality, and respect, and you were served cruelty instead." He paused. "This restaurant will be closed for the next 2 weeks. Every member of the staff will be interviewed. Every policy will be reviewed. And when we reopen, it will be under new management." He turned toward Naomi. She stood near the hostess stand, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Ethan walked over to her. The entire room watched. He stopped in front of her and extended his hand. "Naomi Brooks," he said clearly, "I owe you my life. And I owe you an apology. You should never have been put in that position. You should never have had to choose between your safety and doing what's right." She shook his hand, unable to speak. When this restaurant reopens, Ethan continued, I want you to lead it. Not as a server, as the general manager. Naomi's breath caught. I don't have the experience. You have something more important, Ethan said. You have integrity, and that's what I need. He smiled faintly. The rest we can teach. 6 weeks later, La Meridian reopened on a Tuesday morning. The dining room had been repainted. The staff had been retrained. The menu had been redesigned with input from the people who actually worked the floor. And in the new manager's office, behind Naomi's desk, hung a small frame. Inside was a torn piece of receipt paper. 3 lines. 9 words. Do not eat. They're watching you. This was meant to harm you. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Courage doesn't wait for permission. Ethan Cross. Naomi sat at her desk, reviewing the night's reservations. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. How's the first week? She smiled and typed back. Busy. Honest. Better. His reply came instantly. That's all I ever wanted. Naomi set her phone down and looked at the note on the wall. She had thought that night would destroy her. Instead, it had rebuilt her, and it had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. One person, in one moment, can change everything. Richard Calloway never worked in hospitality again. Tony left the industry entirely. Marcus was blacklisted after the investigation. But Naomi? She became one of the most respected managers in the entire Cross Hospitality Group. Not because someone gave her a chance, but because she earned it. One quiet act of courage at a time. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss another one. Comment and tell me about a time someone stood up for you, or a time you stood up for someone else. And hit that like button because stories like this deserve to be shared. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.